Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk about the books that I've been reading this week. It's been a fun reading week. I hope you are keeping really well yourselves. Now that I'm finished with reading for the Booker Prize, I have a little bit more space in my head. So I'm going to fill that space by reading old Booker Prize books and continuing on that project. But in the meantime, here are some other books that I've been reading. So let's get talking about them. First up, I read the wonderfully titled 3,000 Lesbians Go to York by Jane Traies. And she herself, Jane Traies, was involved in the what I'm about to talk about, which was setting up a literary festival in York for queer women. And she writes about this so interestingly, and it's also quite fun because it's very much like lots of pictures from the events, lots of even schedules and things like this. Hang on, where we go. Yeah, so for example, this is just one of the schedules that was sent out with, oh, here are all the people who are going to be talking at some point and all the little bios and everything. Fascinating book. So I've got ahead of myself here, but let's go back to this. So York Lesbian Arts Festival was set up and continued on for most of the sort of early 2000s. And it was a place where a lot of queer women were basically able to meet each other in this really interesting way. It essentially, we don't often have many things like this at least in the UK. We don't often see specifically queer arts festivals, and particularly not ones that are specifically one of the letters or one kind of area of the queer community in quite this way. And particularly queer women are often left out of a lot of the big festivals. You don't quite see as much representation often for women within the community, and particularly for big things like this. And what we see coming up is so interesting, I think, in this book, because you've got authors, particularly people like Ali Smith early into her career, lots of other women writers from the queer community, all talking about their books and their artistry and everything else. But what comes across more in this, I think, is just the energy that was generated by something like this. The fact that by having an arts festival for queer women in York, a tiny city, which I used to live in and I love very much. And I realised I must have overlapped with this a few times, but had no idea this was happening. And this is something so fantastic because it basically meant that so many queer women authors were able to really kickstart their careers. So even people like Val McDermid, the crime author, she sort of sees in quite early days of this that she has a big supporter base. We see Ali Smith, a few other authors really show up in this. And there's something just so beautiful and exciting about reading something like this, and so something so joyous that even though the festival has now finished and hopefully something like it will come back again at some point, seeing people like Sarah Waters and Jackie Kay on the front cover here really have these moments where they were able to shine and meet their community, but also for many people who attended, that's where many relationships started. Many people met people like them for the first time, perhaps. Something so beautiful. I read this as part of, it was one of the books on the Polari long list, the non-debut one, and it's so beautiful to see a book like this getting the recognition it deserves, particularly because this is an entire festival I had no idea about, and it's so beautiful to read about. Continuing on with some Polari reading from that same long list, Girls, Etc. by Rhian Elizabeth. And this is so beautiful as well. This talks a lot about love and desire, but also about things like motherhood. And it does so in these really beautiful poems that I just found so tender and insightful, but also very funny and silly at times as well. There's a poem, for example, about Taylor Swift, and there are these poems about other things and people and what have you. But there's alongside the joyousness, there's something very wise in there about the ways that we create our lives and our sense of identity and keep creating that and keep building on that in various other ways. So the idea of how that your idea of being a queer woman might change after motherhood, or how other things might morph for you as well. I just found this really beautiful and really beautifully done. And yeah, it was just something full of joy. I really want to go and check out her other writing as well, because I just really enjoyed this collection. I just thought it was really beautifully done and really sensitive and sensual and so many other things. Last but not least, I read this non-fiction book called Red Pockets by Alice Mah. And in this book, Alice Mah basically does quite a few interesting things with non-fiction and with a kind of memoir. She starts off with approaching something called, I think, Ting Ming, which is a funeral rite, or a kind of a thing, a kind of cultural practice where you return to your ancestral home, your family's tribal ancestral home, to sweep the graves, to basically make sure that you are keeping that kind of line to your history, but also making sure that they are untroubled in the afterlife in various ways. Kind of making sure that you are respecting your ancestors. And it starts with this, with a travel to trying to find the Ma family home, which seems to involve going through big cities and then to smaller cities, then into towns and villages, and eventually finding something approaching it. And in the meantime, a lot of things get thrown up into the air that kind of get discussed. So one of those is firstly about this idea of ancestry and what it means to have something like this that binds you back to a specific place or a specific land, and whether you are right to kind of do that, or whether actually stepping away makes sense, and all these other kind of conversations about that. But not only on top of that duty, you get these conversations about then the expectations. So she herself is not living in China and is expected to bring in all of these fancy gifts because it's believed that she is going to be wealthy and all of these other things. And in bringing these expensive gifts, it suddenly becomes something quite odd for her, where she starts talking about the difficulty of this, that it's not just I've come to visit and it's taken me forever to get here, but actually I've got to bring all these gifts, and if I haven't brought an expensive enough gift, or if I give gifts to this person and not this person, it's a whole thing. And she feels somewhat at odds with everything that's going on. Already I thought that was quite interesting. And the book then goes from this into something even deeper about the environment and about land, that if you want to be able to protect your ancestral home, part of that might also be about the environmental aspects of all of this. If your small village is being destroyed by pollution and all the local rivers or lakes or whatever are being affected by this, if the radiation or pollution level in the air is too high that it makes things unlivable, what does that mean for these ancestors, and for returning to a place that is therefore somewhat dangerous or compromised in some way? And the book then becomes this really interesting discussion about the idea of belonging and ancestry set aside climate change. And it's such a genius way of framing this. And I just found it utterly fascinating, because she is traveling with somebody who was constantly doing a kind of a pollution reading of the air, and keeps on saying, well, this is completely, this is like a big city level of pollution. What's going on here? And the conversation that comes out of that, I think, is so interesting, that this idea of, well, surely the best way to look after your ancestors is not just this one cultural practice of going back and sweeping a grave, but might also be to actually protect the world we live in, full stop. That is a better way of ensuring future life goes on for your family line than anything like sweeping a grave might be. And the two can go hand in hand. But this idea of almost, well, actually, if suddenly at various points in the year, so many people across China and across the world are traveling to these places, there's an environmental cost to that as well, that in many ways disrespects the planet that the ancestors looked after. And it becomes this whole interesting conversation. And I think this is an utterly fascinating book. It's such a brilliant way of approaching a topic like this. And I just thought it was an interesting book on every front, about climate change, about cultural practices, and as a sort of memoir about family and identity for Alice Mah herself. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought this was fantastic. Yeah, really interesting book. So those are the books that I've been reading this week. I hope you are keeping really well. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.